So we've done many episodes on Lucy Letby now. This, I think, is the 4th.
Yeah.
A lot of time has passed. I don't think we've talked about this in 2025 yet.
Yes and no.
So we're looking maybe probably 5, almost going on 6 months, I reckon, since we last spoke.
A lot.
Yeah. I'm trying to think the best way to intro this. Do we want to start on the basis that if you've listened to this, you've heard the other ones, or do we want to do a quick fire summary of what's happened?
I think I would suggest to anybody that you should probably just listen to the 3 other episodes, because there's a lot discussed there. But you know, over the course of those 3 episodes, I moved from I'm uncomfortable about this to I'm really uncomfortable about this to I'm pretty convinced that she's like I'm 99.9% convinced that she's completely innocent. And I would say that they like 0.01% that I wasn't has moved a couple of zeros further down the line. Essentially, at the point that we were talking last year, a few people in the press and you know, David Davis, politician, and a few other people had come forward basically outlining concerns. Doctors were coming forward outlining concerns. Statisticians have been coming forward outlining concerns. And David Davis had said that, and Phil Hammond, the medical writer for Private Eye, both sort of said versions on the same thing, which is that experts were coming forward to them, like not nutters, people who are at the top of their game, coming forward and saying to them, I don't know about any of the rest of it, but the bit that I know about is wrong. But all of these people from all these different specialities of medicine and neonatology, specifically, and statistics and everything, all coming forward going, don't know about the rest, but my bit's wrong. That's nonsense. And Felicity Laura's a Guardian journalist was interviewed not too long ago. I think that was on the Tortoise podcast, and she discusses how difficult it was to try and express any doubts about it at the time because of the way the media narrative was driven. But since our episodes, there have been 2 press conferences by her new lawyer who's handling her application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And both of those have been utterly devastating with regards to what's been revealed. I mean, to talk, it's if we talk about things that we've talked about before, for instance, the thing that you were really horrified by, for instance, was the baby that was the accusation that she punched a baby. And I could see, like, you were really viscerally affected by it. I think it was so bizarre.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, obviously it's a horrifying accusation, but I think that the thing that jumped out was the inconsistency in method that I think any criminal investigator, not that that's what I am, but I think that would be something you would consider. That you'd think that that's an escalation, because how somebody kills is important to what they're being accused of doing, and to go from we're talking about silent, injecting ear, methodical. It wasn't about inflicting suffering. Whereas if you're punching, even an adult, that's a totally different thing. It speaks to someone who is gaining pleasure from the act, and that it does not fit the rest of the pattern. Horrifying, but also it doesn't fit the pattern.
Incongruous.
Exactly. So therefore that should jump out at people, and didn't for some reason at the time.
And so one of the things that has come out basically what I should say is that there was a paper. Sorry, I had a complete senior moment there. There was a paper that had been written by a Canadian neonatologist called Dr. Lee, and about the air embolus in babies, and this had been used by Dowie Evans and in court, and by the consultants who'd accused her, to say that a rash that they had seen on the babies meant that she had been injecting them with air on purpose. And Dr. Shuley, I don't believe had heard anything about this at all. He didn't realise it was his paper that had been used. He'd heard until after it had all sort of happened, by which point, when he realised it was his work that had been used, he paid more attention. He'd heard about the case on the news, but he hadn't realised he had anything to do with it. Once he had a look at what was being said, he was absolutely horrified because it just was not at all what his paper was about. So it's important to say that there's a difference between injection into veins and injection into arteries, pulmonary versus vascular. And if I remember correctly, his paper was all about pulmonary. He never said so, it hadn't been explicitly said so, but they had all been pulmonary embolisms, not vascular, whereas the accusation against Letby was that it was vascular. And those systems work differently. And so the other thing was that he said that this rash only occurred in 10% of cases of pulmonary embolism. So if you're saying that there's all these cases and they've all got this rash, then effectively they are the 10%. There is therefore another 90 that you've not seen, which, well, there simply wasn't. So it's an obvious nonsense as far as he's concerned. But he was so horrified that there's evidence was refused by the Court of Appeal because they basically said, well, it should have been at trial, you know.
Yeah. So it's not new evidence.
Not new evidence.
Because your lawyers could have contacted the author of the paper at the time to get him to refute it, and he didn't. Which I can't believe that is the way our court system operates.
But it does.
It seems like that is the reason the Court of Appeal should exist, because you had incompetent defence, and I know that you have that in the States.
Yeah.
And the fact that we don't have an avenue for if we're incompetently defended is bonker balls bat so insane. Like, I can't understand.
Yeah, it's nuts. One thing to say in defense of her defense is that I've now been, listening to AI readings actually a lot of the time of the transcripts, because the transcripts have now been made available, and the easiest way to voice them is actually just get an AI to voice them, and there is an account that's putting those out, and I have listened to some of those. Is that actually he did a really, really good job. It's just that the jury were obviously thick as fuck. Unfortunately, like, her defense did actually take it all to bits, and I can sort of understand why they thought they'd done enough, but they haven't.
I think that's the thing that from everything we've talked about, and I know that some of the stuff we have talked about, the jury might not necessarily have heard.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that if I was, and you have to sort of go back in time and empathetically put yourself in that lawyer's shoes.
Yeah.
You and I, if we encountered this person, you're obviously you're sort of the
and the evidence against you is obvious nonsense, and
right. So we do have to sort of frame it as that. You can understand why maybe they felt they'd have to push as hard as maybe now in hindsight, being 2020, we should have. But you can understand why at the time. Obviously, innocent client.
I think you could have had everything. I think you could have had all of that, and I think they would still have found her guilty. I think it was almost impossible, because I think you got a jury that were not paying attention to what was going on. I think also having all of the cases tried together makes it easier to get a conviction, because just the weight of it. I think if you had a single case and you tried to prove it, it would be much easier for the defense to pull it to bits and for it to be seen. But when something's going on over 6 months, it's almost impossible. But anyway, so Shuley convened a panel of the best people in the world to review all the cases, and they worked on the cases in pairs. And if they didn't they would basically, you'd have two people looking at a case, they'd go through all the notes, then they would reach their conclusions, then they would discuss with each other. If they didn't agree, it would go to a third person. So it was this completely independent, and they're from all over the world, so they're not people that have got any necessarily
just like Swiss and Canadian.
Yeah, from all over the world. And their verdict coming back was that there's no evidence of a single murder at all. But what there is instead is plenty of evidence that the consultants were utterly inept and out of their depth, that the unit was horrific. Shirley said, if I was in charge of if he'd been put in charge of this unit, he would have simply closed it down. It was filthy, it was dangerous, the consultants were inexperienced. They weren't.
So the conclusion is, but if you go back to the first episode, everything that we were having a obviously heavy subject matter, but a gentle chat about, and at the end of that, I think we more or less say, this feels like she is quite possibly innocent, but this shines a terrible light on the state of the National Health Service.
Particularly maternal care, which is dreadful, and we have some of the worst outcomes in the Western world.
What is driving this conviction against her is not really anything she's done wrong. It's, please God, don't look at all this other stuff.
Yeah,
Because if we do that, you're going to, as you just highlighted there, you've got institutional questions, not only about the health service, but our justice system as well. And they don't want all of that to be addressed.
No.
And that, I think from the beginning, that's the direction that I felt the discussion's moving in, and now obviously with thorough proper research being done, it sounds like that's actually been backed up. That's not just a kind of opinion we're having based on a chat. That's now
And so
legit.
the case of the baby who was allegedly being punched, Dowie Evans managed to completely miss in the notes that that baby had been on ventilation that had swelled its abdomen up like a wee drum, and that one of the consultants who had accused Letby had actually tried to get that to go down by sticking a needle in their abdomen. And when he pulled the needle out, blood came out, so he clearly perforated the liver of the child under pressure. And then they kept the ventilation on, which meant that the baby's liver was injured. And there's a very strong chance that that is what caused that injury, among other things that went wrong with that baby. And most recently, the thing that's come out, this is just, I think last weekend, was it not? Yeah. So we went into great length discussing I think it was baby K, which was the one that she was retried for, which is the one where Dr. Ravi Jairam says he's standing at the nurse's station and Letby is on her own with the baby, and after 2-3 minutes he becomes so concerned that he goes into the room and he looks at his watch and he's got this clear memory and all the rest of it. And there's all sorts of things that we pulled apart with this. The fact that Letby was actually working in a completely different room, that with this is one where they'd moved this because of the door swipe data being the wrong direction, to have happening after 2:50 in the morning, when in actual fact it had all happened before 2:50 in the morning. It had all happened in this window between 2:41 to 2:47 in the morning. Again, when Letby is definitely working in a completely different room. He says the alarms weren't going off, but in earlier testimony he said he wasn't sure. But the nurse that was working in the room who came back to, says when she got back onto the ward, the alarms were going off. So there were all sorts of discrepancies. But now we find out that he wrote an email about this incident to the discussing the situation amongst themselves, the consultants, and he wrote about this incident, and he actually said that Letby had come to fetch him to let him know that the baby was desaturating.
Oh dear.
Now, this email was written something like, I think, 7 months after it had happened. So by this point, I still don't think it was Letby in the room. I think it was. So what I think happened is,
But that means his memory's changed like 6 or 7 times.
yes. So
He's lied to courts.
what I actually think happened is that, as we discussed at length in the podcast, I think Caroline Oakley came back in at 2:41, and when there's a door swipe on her doing that, she goes back into the room where she's working with Joanne Williams. Joanne Williams needs to go and speak to the parents of one of the babies that she's looking after. So once Oakley gets back, she can leave. Ravi Jairam is at the nurse's station. When Williams leaves, he's on the phone and she says to him, I've left. She says that she's left Letby looking after, babysitting, the words that he says. I think he's on the phone. I think she said, I've left Oakley babysitting. I've left Nurse Oakley. Letby, Oakley, you're on the phone. Dead easy. And then what has happened is the baby is desaturated. The nurse, whether it's Letby or whether it's Oakley, has come to fetch him. He's gone back. Joanne Williams has come back onto the ward, heard the alarms going off, and this is what's happened. So whether it's Letby or whether it's Oakley, and my opinion is that it's Oakley, what's actually happened is that the nurse came to fetch him, and that's what he writes the first time he discusses it.
So in the episode, if you listen back to it, I become quite fixated on checking his watch.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that this point...
You thought it was weird that you would...
Because, well, if you think about it, you walk in, so he's saying something's happened, there's a fuss, and I'm looking over, you would immediately go and go, what's happening?
Yes.
Whereas if he already knows what's happening, it totally makes sense. Right, okay, this is happening, and I'm logging the time. So the sequence of that, the watching that description to me is no longer suspicious or questionable. That actually fits very schedule. Oh, but again, to your point though, it doesn't mean that Lucy Letby was there necessarily though.
No.
That's still that, and the data with the swipe doors and so forth is
I think basically what we can say from this is that every single word that man has said in relation to this can be completely discredited and discounted. Other people who haven't had a proven history of lying repeatedly about this one incident have said something that contradicts everything that he says.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Now, I'd given him, to a certain extent, the benefit of the doubt that he thought that he was telling the truth, but that memory is very malleable. However, he gets no more benefit of any doubt from me, because 11 days later, they are discussing taking it to the police, the consultants, and they are putting together a document that, as he describes it, is to pique the interest of the police. I think those are the words, right?
Oh,
And this same incident with the baby is recounted, but this time he omits the nurse coming to fetch him. And so the thing that is, because
To make it sound more incriminating.
to make it sound like he's had to go in, and so that is a deliberate manipulation. And so we can, right at the beginning of this, they were shaping the stories to make it sound as bad as possible. And there is no possible way of looking at that doesn't say that they were simply, whether or not they thought she was guilty or not, they were fitting her up.
It's also just the highlighting which nurse was it? The fact that there isn't a sufficient logging system.
Well, there is.
What are the key?
So there's the medical notes of the baby that Letby was looking after. She was doing stuff up until 2:50, and I thought it's incredibly convenient that this is all being put on a time after which she has. And I find myself wondering that if there was a crash, apparently she was somebody that she would always gravitate towards helping. She would always, she's somebody that runs towards a problem. It may well be that if there was a crash occurring and her babies were okay, that after 2:50 she was assisting with it. She may well have been there afterwards,
because this has been used to characterize her as a sort of like gallows. Like she just wants to be where the action is. She wants to be. She's a bit morbid. She wants to be where there's death. Yeah, and it's a little bit, even though all of this information has come out, and you have world-renowned experts who are so far above Dowie Evans that they get altitude sickness just engaging with his slop. Even though all of that is true, and even though the alternative explanations that are coming out from people far more qualified than the people who put forward the initial suggestions, there are still extremely dedicated. Lucy Letby is guilty, and they actually think that if you have any opposing opinion, you're insane, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're akin to an anti-vaxxer. And whenever I see the arguments from them, they just don't make any sense to me, as like on a personal level. They'll say like, yeah, they've said, that all this stuff about the email, but at the end of the day, if you actually, like, in the transcripts, if you see how she answered those questions, and I go to the transcript and the way she answered those questions, I'm like, that's clearly just a person who doesn't know the answer to the question, because she's not.
but she wasn't doing it. She wasn't there.
Yeah. So when the prosecutor's saying, right, so you're saying this wasn't you, but you still agree with me that there was definitely a murder here, and she's like, yeah, like there must have been. So this person somebody must have done it, but it wasn't me. And then he's saying, you were standing by this incubator doing nothing, and she's like, can you explain that? And she goes, I mean, it's possible that I was monitoring the stats to see. And it's like, this is clearly, if you're reading into this, that this is a guilty person lying, when all of the evidence backs her up that she had no fucking idea. It's not, okay, what she's saying there isn't true. She wasn't standing by the incubator silently watching to see if the person would recover. She's saying one explanation for why I would stand
Well, that might
here
mean if it
would be
there.
this, because I can't categorically say, no, I absolutely wasn't there. I don't have evidence. But now evidence is emerging that she wasn't there, even though that is the initial argument, is I wasn't there. I didn't do
I
it.
mean, you've got people who really, really desperately don't want to admit that this has all been a witch hunt.
Because they've been very rapid about it.
Yeah, and one of the problems you've got is that all that's left is the circumstantial stuff that only ever had any bearing if there really were murders. So I was I was talking to my friend about this, and like on a daily basis, I have loads and loads of things to do, and I routinely text people saying things like "sorted, that's done, da da da." If I'd been accused of a murder, any one of those texts. So why did you text saying sorted
This is
or that's done?
what I was coming back to with the
It
formal.
only has meaning if the other thing is true.
Yeah.
I still think the fact that there aren't cameras, the logging doesn't seem to be sufficient. This doesn't feel to me like a series of circumstances that should be allowed to
I
happen.
mean, to be fair, all of this is 10 years ago, so I don't know what the
that-
situation would be now.
It feels, but it feels to me to be in the ballpark of, because of the state of the NHS, that it's suitable actually that the things I'm talking about aren't there, because we don't want to actually to have.
Certainly.
Because if you were to go to court and this has happened, here's the film, here's the evidence of like how the irrigation in these places wasn't what it should have been.
Yeah.
It was filthy, all this stuff. You don't want that to be public knowledge. Now, to me, it should be someone's responsibility to put their head above the parapet and go, we've got a serious problem here. I need to get better funding, better people to come in here and fix this thing. And it comes back to that idea of arse covering. That's all, the whole thing fused to me. And the heartlessness with how they have gone about doing said arse covering is like a level of almost incomprehensible evil, that this is subject matter, that if you're lying about it, as we're kind of highlighting this guy is doing, I mean, like, either, he's got a memory like a fucking sieve and whatever, but I mean, this feels like he knows what the truth of all this actually is.
It's a very deliberate action. I mean,
Yes.
he's obviously remembered the incident and discussed it on the email. And then less than 2 weeks later, when they're putting stuff together, he's tailored what he writes down about that to make sure that it sounds worse than it would have done otherwise.
Yeah.
And over time, it is possible that he's forgotten what was true.
Because it's emotionally true to him.
Well, this is the thing, it needs to be, when I'm talking about all this stuff, when it comes to this kind of evidence and this environment, you need to have evidence gathering means that are not emotionally driven. So what we don't have here is, so this is again pulling back from military experience of, the way logging was done, emphasis is on that, cameraed, everything like this, to avoid this exact problem of just someone doesn't like somebody else and it becomes an emotional
The other
they
thing
are
is
covering.
that I think there needs to be a register of professional experts, and I don't think police and defence should be allowed to just get anybody they want.
No.
I think from now on, I think there needs to be almost an allocation system whereby once you think you've got something, you get
Sort of defeated.
a lottery of who's going to look at it for you from the professional register.
You absolutely can, if you've been working with the police, then be the expert for the prosecution.
No.
That's a massive. You're checking your own.
Yeah, it's conflict of interest, exactly, totally. I mean, I think that's, we did sort of defend the police somewhat during all of this, because we start from a position of, here's clever doctor man who's come and he's making this complaint, and you sort of, all fairness to the police, why would they doubt that? Now, really, to be completely objective, they should, to do the job
They should have
thoroughly.
done because
actually
there's
sort of understand
the
why.
format for this to have been investigation was the overview panel, trial death overview panel, which any of those doctors could have taken this to at any time and didn't.
Yeah, this is, I mean, so that I think the police have kind of been.
So the police ought to have been checking what's the routine, what should happen, and why haven't you done that? But they didn't,
and if they have asked that question, it's also conceivable that they've just gone, yeah, no, and the cops have gone, all right then, whatever argument that they've presented, whatever the answer to that question is, I think that what has happened here is there's been a presumption of guilt from the very beginning, that as soon as they've arrived into the police station, whatever this, paper, whatever was dropped off that was skewing towards her being guilty, that the part where the police to me have fallen down is they have just gone, all right, and they've not looked at it as, why are you coming in here? Why have you gone about it in this way? Like these obvious questions you start, what's your motive here? Is this maybe not indicative that perhaps you're a part of the problem?
Yeah.
And try to pin this on someone else. They've just accepted in good faith what is being said. And to a certain extent, that is what the public have also, in terms of the mass media presentation of this, gone ahead with, because I think it's a combination of witch hunt, but also to put your head above, because I don't even know which is worse, to accuse somebody of murdering children or to accuse somebody of accusing somebody falsely of murdering children and then going to the extent of drafting a paper to frame them for that crime. I mean, like, either which way you slice it, it's a horrible choice to make. And this is, again, not to defend the outcome, the jury, the trial and everything else, but the emotions that are in play of that, to put your head above the parapet and sort of come down one way or the other.
I mean, the problem, that we like to think everybody has this presumption of innocence, but the truth of the matter is most people sitting on a jury are likely to think that if the police have gone to all this bother, if it's got this far, there's probably something to it. So you don't have a presumption.
Yeah, it's literally a bit in Always Sunny in Philadelphia where they highlight on this where they're doing a kind of mock court case. And he's like, well, because that guy's in the defendant's seat, I automatically think he's guilty. And they're like, no, you have to give it. He's like, no, I actually do. I think he's guilty because he's in the defendant's seat. It's like, yeah, this is the thing. That's what presumption.
Well, you saw it, to bring it back slightly to Scottish politics for a second. I mean, with Nicola Sturgeon, so we can't talk about some of the other components about the thing at the moment, but what we can say is that same concept of, well, the police have been on this for ages, there
must be something.
must be anything. And actually it's turned out that at least with her bit, no, yes, fine. So
It's funny how they finally decided that there was absolutely nothing there just a couple of days after she announced that she wasn't going to be standing for Parliament again.
Yeah, no, funny that, isn't it? Crazy how timing works.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's a different podcast. To come back to this one, but that idea, exactly what you're saying, there's a presumption of guilt, and I think that it's not to defend, in fact, it's definitely not to defend the police, but it's to see it's an understandable chain of events that have started with somebody has decided consciously at some point to be a dick. I do the bad thing, because we've moved our position from this being a kind of series of, and then eventually we got to a point where people realised they made a mistake and started covering their arse.
No.
This feels a little bit more like
the guy that
we started from the beginning.
The guy that had the drawer of doom was a doctor called Stephen Brewery, and he appears to have been the instigator of all of it.
I just think, no, what do you mean by that?
I mean, no. I mean, I don't think that it's been a Machiavellian thing. I think that they all believe it, and then Jairam has been caught up in it and also wants to be a part of it. And he's like, oh, I remember this. And, oh, I think that was a Letby. So no, I don't think it was.
I think it's at some point.
But actually,
yeah.
So Stephen Brewery, apparently is a horrible person to work with. He would have nurses in tears on a almost daily basis. And he was the one, he had what he called the drawer of doom, although he wouldn't show anybody what was in it, which was his accusations against Letby. And he seems to have been the driver, and then he sort of wound everybody else up and then let them go.
Is he also the doctor who we think was responsible for perforating the liver of the baby because he injected, even though the baby had been on the wrong type of ventilation, which had reared like sort of forced some of his organs in different places, and then he injected at the wrong point.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's him.
And I've thought about this, and so there was some rumor apparently, although Letby herself has denied this, but some of the nurses thought that he might have made a pass at her.
Oh dear.
Although Letby says that didn't happen. But I find myself thinking, just because she doesn't realise it happened doesn't mean it didn't happen. Yeah. He might have fumbled something. And I've discussed this with a friend who thinks I'm dead wrong. But I don't think I'm dead wrong. I find myself wondering if all of this hasn't started as a sort of form of of stalking, because often when people have a fixation on somebody, they will use authority to torment that person. If that
Pattern,
person is
the
rejected
pattern or
them.
circumstance, the evidence they've used sort of falls into that category because it's hyperfixation. So you're over analyzing. You just talked about this. So like you're like, here's her written statements, and then people are reading them one way because they're hyperfixated on her being this kind of character. So you're not looking at the document objectively and looking and weighing up, as you're talking about, the possibilities of interpretation.
And it doesn't have to be, necessarily even be a romantic fixation, but you know, it often is, whether or not the person realizes it or not. But she was certainly somebody, she was very bright. From my understanding is that she was a very effective nurse. She would write Datex reports on herself as well as other people. If she thought something had not gone as it should have done, she would write a report down on that to record it, to try and make sure that things were done better another time, including on herself. That's not the behavior of somebody that's trying to, anyway. But I do find myself wondering if it began as a sort of fixation with her because she.
Well, she's a threat. We've talked about that from the beginning. I mean, that's just, you know, the what she seems to objectively represent is the kind of personality that the NHS should
want
actively try and acquire, as in someone that if they see a problem, they say something.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine the culture potentially in certain areas, this is certain areas of the NHS.
I mean,
I say this as someone who's worked in public sector, and I know that sometimes the standards of people will fall below with what's expected. I think there's sometimes a conflation between, right, if it's all about you, fuck off to the private sector. This is one of these areas where actually you need to step up and understand that it's the public first, service before self. And I think there are certain climates that if you're a manager that doesn't really care, and that seems to be quite a recurring theme of what's happening here, that type of individual is at the very least going to stand out. You know, whether or not it leads to a fixation or whatever else, but it's going to be somebody that's going to be memorable because you're thinking, oh, if we get audited, oh, if this, oh, if that. You know, so if you're leading from the top and you're doing everything right, you don't worry because you think, well, if the auditors come in, we'll be fine. Whereas here, if the auditors, we've already know that now, we've established so solidly that if this place was to be looked at objectively, you'd be like, it should be fucking shut down.
I mean, Shuley's press conference when he was discussing some of the things that had been going on, it was fucking mortifying. I mean, you know, the insulin cases, which were the first that the jury came back with a verdict on, and they were the ones that for a lot of people, but you know, there's definitely something wrong here. Some of the explanations with regards to what was going on there are so sort of blindingly obvious that you can't believe that it took the world's experts to point it out. But things like very small babies, rather than being given a constant drip of glucose, were being given boluses, we're getting given a lump of glucose. And I mean, anybody that's eaten a jacket potato knows how you feel at 2 o'clock in the afternoon after you've had a jacket potato. Right? And why is that? Because you get a blood sugar surge, then you get an insulin surge, followed by a blood sugar crash, followed by you slavering on your desk unconsciously, right? Everybody, like anybody who reads Cosmo knows this, right? But that's what they were doing. They were giving boluses of glucose, and so the babies were having a reaction one way, having a reaction the other way. So, you know, glucose up, insulin up, glucose massively down. And so the babies were remaining in a state of low blood sugar because they were, you know, their body was managing out the glucose almost immediately, and they weren't getting the benefit of it. Other things included sort of lines being, you know, put in for fluids, but no fluids going in for hours and hours and hours. So the baby was getting no fluid or no food. And that's a massive risk of infection and a massive risk of blood clot, a massive risk for, you know, like air.
See, if you're, it sounds ridiculous, but if you're then in that environment and that has all been entirely normalized, is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then one woman in the ward's like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
You know, that's all it will take.
And especially if you're a senior consultant and this is some fucking young lass in her 20s who's telling you you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. What you're saying is it's to go right the way through stalking and so forth. We'll maybe explore that. But what I'm saying is that is not at all inconceivable. That's precisely how this is done.
And I want to say that I'm not necessarily saying it's romantic fixation,
Yes.
but the behaviour of like obsessively focusing on one person to make their life a misery is
It's to try and get. It's a control thing.
in order almost to get attention.
Well, it's also to get. It's that she is the anomaly. She's not conforming because none of the other nurses are spoken about in this way. So to me, that speaks to control. It's this idea of wanting to, right? So you're trying to, because you are Mary Poppins, you're trying to be too good. And by being that way, theoretically, all our standards have to rise. We don't want to do that because the cultural norm is this. So therefore, we're just going to keep applying the pressure in hope that you'll do this.
Yeah.
And I think that they've hoped that she'll eventually slip and she'll eventually fuck up. And then that's
Fuck off.
and that's the beginning of, now we're watching you like a hawk, because now it's right. Now I don't like you. So now the second you fuck up, so you're not scrutinizing. This is where you're saying it's not an obsession, it's not a fixation, but you are not applying the same scrutiny to your other staff as you are her because of this. This is she's a different.
It's also nobody thinks to themselves, she has higher standards than me, she's better than me, so I'm going to make it worse. All that they do is, if there's a criticism made against them, they take it as a personal attack.
Yeah.
They have personal offence to it. They don't think there's any way that this person, like, if you're a consultant, you're Stephen Breary, what the fuck does this nurse know?
Yeah. Who the fuck do you think you are?
Who do you think you are? Yeah. It's not really oh no, she's going to make us raise all our standards. They're not going to think like that. They already think their standards are like where they need to be, even though there's shit in the sinks, because that's how normalization works. So if you're a diligent, conscientious nurse coming in a ward where there's shit in the sinks and everyone's just like, oh, shit's in the sinks again, guys, we need to call the plumber again, you'd be like, wait, for what?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you're saying there when you're saying stalking fixation. I think that's hopefully quite an articulate way of describing what we're meaning by that.
Yeah.
That it's just that simple act of one of these things is not like the others, so eyeballs go to that thing. And therefore, the scrutiny that she's not being equal to her other individuals. And then I think the longer she goes without fucking up, the more that fixation increases. And then suddenly we pivot into, now we got to start finding some stuff.
They only went to the police after basically she won her grievance against them. So she put in a grievance against like 4 consultants.
Who the fuck do you think you are?
And she won.
Yeah.
And that was the point at which they then fucking got their stories together and went to the cops.
I don't mean to.
But let's be honest about this. Really, if you thought somebody was a fucking murderer, would you be happy that, well, I don't work with them anymore, so I don't need to worry about it? No.
Everybody has met or encountered humans that are this petty.
Yes.
So I think nothing that we are saying here is inconceivable.
Work with these cops.
What feels shocking is that this is because we don't work with dying children. Yeah. That if you had normalized the activity of working with of dying children and normalized it in the context of shit in the sinks, this is not inconceivable behavior, because if you just take the same principles of what we're talking about and apply it to your boring job that's not getting dead kids anywhere near it, this shit could happen to you. And the thing that I keep coming back to is there are no fail-safes. There is no protection. And that is alone. So I think Lucy Letby should not be in jail. But I also think that this is just distraction from not getting to the core of these problems.
There was a nurse in Italy who did a very similar thing, and obviously there's Lucia de Burgh in Holland, who's famously exonerated, and the case against her was so fucking similar, so similar. But it's. We ought to be looking at the fact that there's this it's a terrible coincidence, isn't it? That the people who get accused of killing children are the people who work where children die.
No, it really is. It is witch hunt behaviour. There's that great talk from that psychologist, and he was like a historical professor. I think you sent it to me.
Oh yes,
I sent it to you. And he's talking about the similarities between sort of medieval witch hunts and the Lucy Letby case.
Yeah.
It's a really, really interesting piece.
I think it's, I don't think there's any ways to say otherwise. I think in plain, that's why we have the term. We should use it to describe this.
Well,
I would love someone to come and explain to me any other angle or applicable term for this, but I feel that's exactly what you've got from the way the media has handled it, right the way through to what's instigated it to begin with, the way the police have approached it. All of it seems to be about avoiding the actual issue so back when the witch hunt was like, maybe we should stop believing in magical bollocks and killing innocent people. That sounds like a societal issue we have to address here. Nah, get it in the river. It's like, that's the same thing that's happening here.
right,
where,
we did the-
don't worry about the shit in the sinks. She's definitely punched that baby to death. You know, that's the same thing. I think it's to us, it's hard. This is probably the media's issue's been as well. It's almost as difficult to get your head around somebody falsely accusing someone of punching a baby to death as it is somebody just punching a baby to death. It's like that in itself is so, like,
I know,
either
so
which way
mad.
that goes, it's horrendous.
I really recommend finding the episode of, I think it's the Tortoise podcast with Felicity Lawrence, and another journalist who had initially thought that she was guilty and who was completely done a 180 on that. But Felicity Lawrence talking about, well, she was covering the trial and she was listening to this at the time, and like, what a good critical thinker she is, because she was listening to this at the time thinking, no, this doesn't sound right to me. And she went and asked doctors. She went and phoned people, and they were like, what?
Yeah.
And so she said, but there was simply no space available in the UK media to put forward a dissenting view.
Yeah, no one
And
could.
that's it. Now, that is a problem.
A huge thing that we'd heard, and we've sort of stopped seeing it now, from people who are really on the no, she's guilty. Regardless of what you say, she's guilty.
Yeah.
Because the weight of all the evidence, like, even if you come up with, like, even if you put holes in this bit or this bit, she's still guilty. And I'll never believe anything else. One of the things that they say an argument is, but you haven't sat through the whole trial. So now all of the transcripts are coming out. I've read them, you've read them, but you still haven't sat through the whole trial. So now we have people, journalists, who sat through the whole trial, who then sat through the panels that Shirley, Shirley hosted, and went, that absolutely trounced the prosecution's entire case. This is extremely damning. And people have completely 180'd on their opinion.
Yeah.
So what's the response to that? And anytime somebody sensible, somebody respected, somebody at the top of their game comes out and adds their voice to the growing number of expert voices who have concerns and sometimes just outright eviscerate the prosecution's case against Lucy Letby, the response is, oh, there's another one being bought in. There's another one being taken in by this. Oh, there's another one falling to this. And it's like, at what point do you have to say, like, okay, what does anybody have to gain by sticking their neck out for somebody who's been accused of the worst possible crime that a person can be accused of committing?
The interview that he did, and the bit in that interview where he's like, what?
I know you're going
Oh,
to
sorry. Oh, yeah. And so he starts going like, well, I just think that a lot of men out there are just looking at this pretty nurse and they want to, like, save her. That felt like such projection. You're kind of announcing that
Confession.
there is a there's something misogynistic going on here, but I don't think it's from us, but it might be from you.
I mean, Darry Evans has been so discredited. He might not have even been a registered doctor at the time that he was fucking doing this. Apparently, he wasn't on the medical register. I believe that. At some point when he ought to have been, I believe he wasn't. But I mean, he's earned a great deal of money from doing this, so he can't really go back on it. But I mean, in that in that interview with John Sweeney, that we discussed this before, that there is a moment where Sweeney brings up the child of Sally Clark, because he's going on about, oh, well, babies don't just have infections and it doesn't show. And he says, well, no, they do, Harry Clark. And there is a moment where you see him realise that there's a thing he didn't know.
Yeah.
And there's your window there. If you had any decency, you had a moment there where you could have gone, oh my goodness, I didn't know this, and this sheds a new light. But you're not that person.
So after Shirley and his panel of neonatology experts, best in the world experts, practicing, still top of the game, between them have published thousands of medical papers. Darry Evans is a retired paediatrician who has never published a single paper. Let's just get that out of the way. When Dr. Shirley's panel came out and said, we've gone over this independently between us, all of us, global team, for months, independently reviewed them thoroughly, all of them. And these are our conclusions. Our conclusions are that there is no evidence of any murder. Not only that, here are the alternative, much more plausible explanations that have now been corroborated, now that they've been out by many, many other experts in their fields. And I thought, he's going to go radio silent.
But instead,
He just said that Dr. Shuley doesn't know what he's talking about.
it's like you quoted his paper, dickhead.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat about that. The interview when he brings that up. It's like,
But he doesn't know what he's talking about. Did you not know what you were talking about when you used his paper as evidence?
No,
the interview's not
like everybody else, Dr. Shuley does not understand the full facts of the case. It's the same thing that he said about the statisticians. The statisticians don't understand statistics, according to the paediatrician who's been retired for 17 years. The neonatologists don't understand neonatology, and nobody understands anything except Dr. Dowie Evans, whose account does not seem to match anybody else's. Who knows
I can't remember the exact placement in the interview of when he does this sort of weird thing that he does, but it's like the whole tone is gently going, have you thought about it like this? Well, what about that? It's not accusatory. Like you can feel it building. And then as the interview is not going well for him, he basically just gets to the point that, yeah, we just want to shag her. Like that is kind of his comeback on the whole fucking thing. Is just like, well, men think she's hot, so it's weird. Go away. Like it's like that is not the argument or a discussion point of a man with any credibility. It's such a weird. The whole interview is. I don't want to say like don't bother with it, but almost like the rest of it's kind of redundant. It stands as such an anomalously strange thing to come out with, and it would be only said by somebody that knows they've got a
run out of
yeah.
I was listening to the interview, and Chris, you came into the room, and I thought maybe sort of half paying attention. I was sort of sitting next to me, and that bit came, and Chris just did like the slowest turn toward me, and he went, "Did I just hear that right?"
Yeah, I know. I'd wondered why this binked back in my head so clearly, and I remember going, I see where this guy goes with this one, and it was like a kind of right fucking strap in now. And John Sweet does a good job of just laying out, and it's just he knows that what this guy is saying is not the words of a normal person.
Yeah.
You know, it's such a strange fucking opinion to have come out with.
What's evident is that those consultants formed a little cabal amongst themselves, and well, what's coming out from like her friends and people who worked with her and things is that she was, bless her, she was a bit of a goody two shoes. She didn't swear. She almost never swore. And I mean, something that my friend Guy pointed out to me is that I think on one of the notes she's written the word bastards, and this was really out of character for her. But that's like she knew, and it was absolutely incomprehensible to her. She just couldn't understand what it was they had against her, because she hadn't done anything. She just knew she hadn't done anything wrong. But she was terribly fearful that she was responsible by not being good enough.
Yeah.
Not that she had deliberately done anything malevolent.
It goes back to what you also say to me. It's like not understanding motivations, because that's the thing. If she's like, well, I've chosen to do this. This is a public service job where I'm going to accept that my life is going to be worse in endeavouring to help others. And then everyone that has experienced that, if you worked in the public sector and then you bump into a middle manager or something along those lines, and you know that they are not motivated by that same drive.
It's it's incomprehensible. And I mean, there's as you said, there's been a lot made of she was macabre because she was always wanting to be involved in the problematic cases. She was very intelligent. Well, I don't know what I was saying. Well, she is very intelligent. She was highly motivated to be doing the complicated stuff. She was putting herself through every speciality that she could take on.
Yeah.
She would do the work. She would do the course. She was ambitious. She was clever. She was motivated, and she was interested in dealing with difficult things. Those are things that you should be looking for in staff.
We don't like ambitious women. It's
a form of courage to want to be the person that goes and puts yourself in the difficult situation to do the difficult thing.
The difficulty, I think, with people hearing this and projecting onto it a little bit is because we don't as we've pointed out, our day-to-day jobs do not involve tiny babies who are sick and who sometimes, unfortunately, pass away. Our day-to-day job does not involve that.
Yeah.
So my day-to-day job involves cybersecurity. That means that when something extremely complex comes up, which happens all the time, I want to be at the front of it, figuring it out, because that's like, I need to be at the front figuring this stuff out. If I was working in neonatology, that would translate to, okay, there's a really complex case.
This is a good opportunity for me to learn and
I need to
understand.
learn. And if I learn, then it means that I can help prevent this or fix it better next time. But the difference is that for me, complex case means a bunch of ones and zeros on a screen. For a neonatologist or a nurse working in a neonatology unit, it's a complex case means a very sick or dying baby.
Yeah.
Those are the two differences. It doesn't necessarily mean that she's a macabre. That does not ring true to me at all, that somebody who had that kind of personality would work with babies.
Well, I was going to say, where's your, I mean, where's the guide on that? Because I mean, this is, I don't want to say it's par for the course, but I mean, by being involved in that profession, you're going to be inevitably in death. And you could say that of any nurse. And you don't describe nurse. I mean, maybe morticians possibly, but certainly not nurses. You know, you wouldn't say...
No, but it's not unusual at all for people who work in the medical profession to, and similarly with the police and things like that, they tend to have a pretty black sense of humour because it's a necessary coping mechanism.
Yes.
You're going to have to be able to make jokes about awful things as a means of processing and dealing and bonding with the people that you work with.
They literally had a thing where they didn't really know what to do, and sort of political correctness came along because they identified that in the military, that, well, this is a coping mechanism exactly that way. So the emphasis tend to be more on, if you were offended, the idea is you would raise your hand and say, hey, that's a bit too much, and the onus would go on to the other person to sort of dial down. But what they weren't able to really do is, like, you know, we're outlawing dark humour altogether because of, like, well, we have to allow for things to be offensive for this exact reason.
And I mean, the scrutiny that went into things that you wrote, I mean, Christ almighty, you just think about the chats that you have on WhatsApp with your mates, and imagine them being up on a screen and you having to explain them in front of your mum and dad. Fuck me.
Banger post, every one of them. But
like, you know, just like...
I've never made a bad post in my life, so I can't relate to that. But some of the scrutiny paid, and the scrutiny's it's only applied one way. And I approached this quite open-minded, not really sure either way. The time I approached it, there was already quite a lot of evidence that was out there. The court's transcripts were just about to come out and all that kind of thing. So when I was looking at this evidence, I go like, okay, so I could either read it this way or I could read it that way. And then I would read more information from people on both sides of that opinion. And the people on the side of she's guilty could just not allow for the possibility that there's even a chance.
Yeah.
There's even a chance that somebody, not this lady, anybody could do this completely normal, innocuous act. The brainstorming of the letter, where she wrote, I'm guilty, I'm evil, I did this. And on the same letter wrote, like, I don't know why this is happening to me, I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And in the same letter wrote, I killed him because I wasn't good enough to look after them. And if you can take all of that information in, because no one bit of information on there had any more weight than any other bit. If you're going to take any of it at face value, you have to take all of it at face value.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do that, then it all just gets thrown
It all just cancels it.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
people that doubt her think she's guilty as well in terms of the online activity of it, what some of them actually do for a living. So I think one of the other problems coming back to have been accused to begin with here is that thing of when you see someone who's actually a nice person and very intelligent and motivated to do good in the world, it's kind of like a mirror to yourself. And I think that some people can either look at that and be inspired, and it becomes like an aspirational thing, or it becomes that no one's that good.
What's your game?
Because I'm fucking awful, and I'm the protagonist of life. So there are no good guys in life. There are no good guys in life because I'm the good guy, and I'm
always judging other people by their own life standards.
That is when we say the witch hunt component. That's a major player in all of this. That I think from the media right through to the online activity.
We are back to Dunning-Kruger. We always come back to the competence confidence curve. Right?
what wider societal issues about the distrust of experts and the downplaying of experts by the media, the idiocy we have of like, here's the climate change expert, and now here's Susan from Ipswich who doesn't think they
She thinks he's great.
she thinks the world's flat or whatever the fuck it is, and the BBC had the platform of 50-50 like that. The fallout of like Me Too, the misogyny, the fact that this all highlights like, yeah, we're still there. No progress has actually meaningfully been made on any of this. The view that, oh, the NHS is horribly mismanaged, just cut it, just privatize it. All those things, like, one note after the other. You can completely understand why, like, the British media establishment was like, yeah, we're not going to address any of that. We'll just put it on this one nurse and we can all move on now. And you're like, no, actually, no. And that's the only thing that I think people that listen to this have been championing this being revisited, let's say.
Yeah.
Even if you're willing to still say she might be guilty, but even if your drive is, I think we have to take another look at this, it speaks to you wanting to have a better society than this shithole we're in at the moment. So well done, you.
I think we can. I think one of the take-homes is like, if everyone's going on about something, stop and pause and ask yourself whether or not just because a lot of people are talking about it, it's necessarily true. Like, I always think for me that my start into little wormholes like this, rabbit holes, fucking lost weekends reading up on things. It's always something little. It's always some little inconsistency with something that makes me go, ooh.
Sometimes in order to arrive at an inconvenient truth, it requires quite a lot of reading, quite a lot of learning about a thing, quite a lot of applying critical thought. So then to explain that effectively to someone who disagrees, you have to ask them to engage that same level of critical thought. And that's not usually welcome. I do resent sometimes feeling like I have to talk to these people when I feel like I approach most of my media consumption and my consumption of news and information from a very critical point, and always have done. And then I watch the way that some of these people engage with information like children stumbling through a dark room.
Yeah.
And then they think that they can come to me and explain to me why not only am I wrong, but I'm a complete moron. I do resent it, but on the other hand, I do think that you can arrive at the right answer without the right means or motivations. Which is why I am deeply uncomfortable with being aligned on this issue with somebody like Peter Hitchens. And I think that perhaps some people who have found this podcast because we've been talking about Lucy Letby have come from that sort of media environment.
Oh, I know, because they've listened to the Lucy Letby episodes and they were absolutely horrified about what we had to say about J.K. Rowling.
If you are listening to this and you're transphobic, you can fuck
Yeah,
off.
fuck off.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, they don't care.
I mean, I think it has been interesting for me because I just think that there are people that I'm, again, I mean, David Davis, I've always had a slight soft spot for David Davis because I just think.
So did Alex Salmond, apparently.
Yeah, they were good mates, but just because I think, although I probably disagree with him on loads and loads of stuff in terms of politics,
When someone's actually earnest.
he believes, he doesn't do something unless he believes in it, and he's actually somebody who's personally courageous.
I think, I was actually just thinking there, not to say bar too much on the transphobic stuff, but I think that observationally what tends to happen is that a news thing breaks, and then rather than people stopping, I think, as a lot of listeners to this would do, and you two would do, and go, how do I feel about that? And you go like inner moral barometer. What is this?
Yeah.
There's another type of person that goes, what's the popular thing to say right now? And they don't engage that moral barometer bit. So this happened with the media bait and switch with like the trans rights and so forth, where the media were always skewing quite negatively on that. So I think a lot of people at the time thought that's going to be the consensus opinion, that trans rights are shit. Fuck those trans people. And then what's gradually happened is that normal people with actual moral barometers, which is the majority of folk out there, go, what's your fucking problem? Leave them alone. But people got very loud and very vocal. They jumped to that too fast. And I think similar with things like this, that if the media skew it in a kind of, spooky nurse kill baby, And then rather than you go, oh, right, I better find out more information about that, which is what moral barometer would say, that person goes, oh, I'm going to go in the office tomorrow and I'm going to say some nasty things about what the media said about that. And then that's when it begins.
Yeah.
And they're not doing it because they actually care about dead children or innocence, guilt, anything like that. They're just doing it because it's things to say. This happened without exaggeration when the Israel-Palestine thing happened. I could tonally hear people going, they didn't actually know what the right thing was. They were checking what was the right thing to say. And you can tell when you're dealing with a person like that, that they're not interested in doing the right thing because it's the right thing. They're interested in the social credibility they have about saying the popular thing at the time. And that's a contributing factor to the witch hunt element with this as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, David Davis has championed any number of what he thinks is, injustice causes. So yeah, I think we become very tribal, and we don't want to work with people who. This is a problem of the left, and it's now to an extent becoming a problem of the hard right as well. Is an intolerance for people who have different ideas or opinions or values.
It's a problem with the hard right.
Yeah,
The moral you're right. The moral barometer will vary, but at least he's got something in him that he's thinking what is, in his opinion, it could be wrong.
What's the right
thing to do? Yeah. He's not going, what's the popular thing to do?
Yeah.
And I think that I just
And
he's good or bad.
Any number
but
of unpopular.
you can respect that. So for good or ill, you go, at least when you're saying something, you're gonna mean it rather than.
This is where it is. The difference between that and Peter Hitchens is that he's just a fucking contrarian prick.
Yes.
And
he's an asshole.
Click.
It's a really nice story about David Davis, apparently, that he saw, because he's quite a big bloke as well. He's getting on a bit, but he's still in quite good shape. He was a soldier. And he saw somebody beating up he saw some fucking yobs beating up a homeless guy. And he fucking stepped in, dealt with him, and then took the guy home, let him sleep on his sofa, and then took him to hospital in the morning.
Oh, that's nice.
Now,
That's a decent thing.
That's a decent human being. That's an objectively good person. He has different opinions than me on Brexit, but he's not a bad guy.
Yeah.
And he's obviously somebody, and that's why I think the science advisor, whose name I can't remember right now, took it to David Davis, because he knew, he knew he needed a politician.
And you knew that's who was on the yacht. Okay, he took it to David Davis. The other guy who was that. I need to Google this. If you don't know, I need to Google this.
I only know that he took it to David Davis because he knew that he wouldn't be worried about being unpopular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that to me is where we're at with it. Is there any other sort of factual information, just while you're looking this up, we wanted?
No, not really. I mean, as I say, I had given Jaram the benefit of the doubt, but no more. He actively lied by omission to pique the interest of the police, and he made a thing worse on purpose, and he has to have known that he did that at the time, and he didn't think he'd ever be caught. So the only thing is that it looks like the Thirlwell inquiry might have had that email before her second trial, and that's pretty fucking damning, because that's directly exonerating evidence.
I mean, if this ends the way I think it's going to end, which is, I think the full story is going to come out eventually, and I think the ripple effects of this are going to be felt for decades.
Well, what's interesting is that the police are talking about doing a sort of corporate manslaughter case against sort of some of the chief execs at the hospital. I'm not a lawyer, but if I were a lawyer representing any of them, I would argue that they are innocent because none of it happened, and that becomes an opportunity for that evidence to be put forward in a completely new trial.
Yeah, I think this inevitably the truth will come out about this one. To me, even the first episode where you referring to Laura and myself, were quite open about the fact that, right, well, just walk us through exactly what's happened here. And I mean, I don't think you could have got 5 minutes in before the eyebrows are furrowing down. You're going, wait, what? Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about this. This is not Laura's totally right. Go away, do the reading, learn as much as you can. That's, devil's in the details, totally agree with that. However, you will start the process of, this doesn't feel right very quickly. It's not going to take long into this before you go, what the fuck? When you watch, and I don't mean to be derogatory or downplay this, but when you watch a Netflix documentary about something, there's usually that 5 or 10 minutes where it's like, everything's just A-okay and everything's this. And then there's the turn.
that's not even, it's not even 10 minutes here. This is like you're in the door and immediately like, wait, they've done what?
We'd be interested in it. I don't have any evidence to back this up, so this is just like I'm pulling this out my arse. I would be interested to know what the numbers are on this, but I would imagine that if you've been with the case for a while, possibly from the start, and you've invested a lot emotionally in this guilty nurse, and if you've been doing the thing for years where you've been going into work and talking about it, and then a bunch of people who don't know anything about it pick it up and go, oh, this all looks actually a bit dodgy. I feel that the people who would look at the Lucy Letby thing and not immediately get a bit suspicious about quite a lot of these things, you have to be a person who's been following it from the start. If you come at it with fresh eyes, it's very difficult to land in the
I'm sure
definitely guilty camp.
it's possible that's why, because I mean, as we discussed on the first episode that we talked about, I hadn't paid a great deal of attention to it. It'd been rumbling on in the background, and the first time I did pay attention was when a single fact, which was that there had never been any evidence of her doing anything, and that this was all one guy's retrospective childhood, and I went, what?
Yeah.
So I started from what?
You're like, surely not. What am I missing? Let me find out.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because yes, exactly
That
right.
can't be right.
Yeah.
Oh, that is right.
Because you start from the position that I must be wrong. I must not know the thing. Once I find out more, I'll be assured that the justice was done and everything's okay. And then you are 30 minutes later going, oh, I'm not getting that vibe now. 40 minutes later, then he keeps going on. You're going, I think this is a miscarriage of justice. And you go from there. But the point is, you started from this must be me. Whereas I think what we're saying about these other individuals is they're not motivated for that.
I listened to the whole of that fucking Daily Mail podcast as well, and I did waver backwards and forwards, and I listened to the police talking, and I to a certain extent, I was like, no, it's probably it's probably okay, and I sort of logically told myself, no, what I'm thinking can't be true, but it just wouldn't it wouldn't go away. The voice in my head wouldn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
And I did try and make it, and I did try and ignore it, because what I was thinking was so horrible. I would look on the internet, and there was almost nobody saying anything contrary. There was a few voices, but for the most part, there was very little. And you said, I cannot be the only person. It can't be me and 3 other guys are the only people that have seen that there's something wrong with it. So it must be me. I must be, it must be me. But it just would not go away. It would not go away.
Yeah, I think that the more and more, well-respected experts in the respective fields come out and add their voices, that's good. What I don't think is helpful is lots of probably quite well-meaning people who are, filling up Twitter and comment sections and things like that. If you're not very well presented, if your opinions aren't well thought through, if you sound insane, if you're a person who's like meeting up with other people who think Lucy Letby's innocent with a birthday cake on her birthday and sending her birthday cards and posting about it on Facebook, you're fucking mental and you're not helping our cause at all. I'm just going to say that. I think that's insane. And I think when you've already, the tide's against you already.
Yeah, and it all needs to be professional, legal, statistical, medical.
Yes.
I agree.
So, which is held against you. You can't just be mental. You can do things like that, but don't publicise it.
Yeah. She herself needs support, and she does need birthday cards, and she does need Christmas cards, and she needs people to write to her and tell her that they believe her, because she's if we're right, the worst thing imaginable has happened to her, and she is being mentally tortured by that, and she's in physical danger while she's in prison. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not please, people, if you think she's innocent, please do actually write to her and tell her that she needs that. She actually does. But don't post about it on Facebook. Don't. What she needs is a full court press of, which is what she's getting actually, professional people coming forward to say this, my bit's wrong. I don't know about the others, but my bit's wrong.
I mean, they're also discussing even a format akin to this, but public things to do publicly. That matters. Normalizing the discussion and getting it to a state where you're going to bump into somebody that has gone, I heard she was guilty. and then trying to get into a conversation like this
I had a
about
conversation with my boss the other day, actually. He said to me, what do you think about the socially thing? So he was like,
He's a dump in comedy.
do you have 3.5 hours on your podcasts? No.
It is interesting. I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago at work, and she brought it up, and I think she's almost certainly innocent, and that was what, really?
That was the reaction I got as well. But it was an interest.
Yeah, no, it was like, really, and it was tell me more, and I got about 12 facts into 3 sentences, so they like and that person went, "Are you fucking what?"
Yeah.
I said, "I'm gonna go and watch this. I'd seen the Channel 5 documentary thing. I'm gonna go and watch that." And did, and came up and went, "Fucking hell."
Yeah.
Right. So you can that show that you went to, and then interestingly, when there was one of the press conferences, it was being reported, I was actually in the car with someone from work, because we were doing a delivery on the way home, and it was one of these. It was something, we were doing something whereby basically you couldn't fucking park 'cause it's the middle of Glasgow, so it was like drop and run kind of thing, and it was on the news about the press conference, and he was going, "Fucking hell, what about that, eh? Jesus Christ, the press have got some questions to answer," kind of thing. And it's just like, people get it.
Yeah.
People who haven't been paying a lot of attention, as you say, you come to it with fresh eyes and a bit of new information, and they go, Jesus.
Yeah.
Because everybody fucking knows about the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6 and Andrew Malkinson. We're aware of the fact that these injustices have occurred, that the courts get it wrong, that the establishment tries to prevent that coming out, and people
feel
can
like
engage with
if
that.
the guilty verdict didn't already feel to you like an emotional victory because you hadn't been following the case from the start, believed she was guilty, and you didn't get personal enjoyment out of the guilty verdict, the thought that would be overturned would be like, well, yeah, obviously it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're already holding on to that, and then someone's like, well, no, it's like, no, well, she's already guilty. She's definitely guilty. She's for fact guilty. So no, shut up. Actually, stop.
No innovation will make me. Yeah,
You're a bad person actually for talking about this. Think of the parents.
it's that's one of the things that I feel most sad about, because quotes that come out indicate that they are simply not. They do not want to look at any of the contradictory evidence. No, we sat through the trial, we know the rest of it. And I find this really difficult to understand, because I just think, wouldn't you prefer if your baby hadn't been murdered? I don't understand.
I feel horrendous, where I kind of feel like, so if we're correct in our interpretation of the facts that are available to us at the moment, and there were no murders, and the babies died through a series of incompetence by consultants, poorly run ward, shit in the sinks, etc., but no murder, and you've already lost your child.
Yeah.
The worst thing that could have happened to a person, you've lost your baby, and then someone comes to you and says, by the way, we think your baby was actually murdered by one of the nurses that you trusted to care for it when it was most vulnerable. Then you're dragged through a years-long court process, where eventually you get what feels in the moment very much like justice, and then
It just unravels.
somewhat, as soon as the embargo is lifted, everybody's coming forward with no, this is wrong. You would go, do you know what, fuck off, I don't want to hear about this, stop talking about this. But you can't say stop talking, because I'm sorry, and it's awful, and I wish you hadn't had to go through any of it. I wish your children had survived, and I wish that you hadn't been dragged through this. But the fact of the matter remains that there is very possibly an innocent woman in prison for life for something she didn't do.
And that there are people who are culpable who did that to her, as well as being responsible for the inadequate care that your child received.
But I think that's the thing, that your kid was murdered, horrible, but there is, I think, the opportunity or possibility of closure. Because I think the reality of the situation is that, because nothing from my kid has really changed,
No.
more kids will die, preventable deaths, because of the state of the NHS. So that's a story that has no closure. and it's a story that's bigger than your individual world, and that's a lot for people to take on. But unfortunately, that's the monster that we're up against, and I think it's right that other people probably bear that burden as opposed to those that lost their kid. No one's saying, no one's going, why the fuck aren't you stepping up? You know, that's no one's doing that.
No, to be clear, I'm not saying it, but
Yeah.
I don't think that if it were, I hate people who say this actually, like, well, I wouldn't do that. I don't think if it were me that I would be satisfied by an answer that might be wrong. But then that's why I'm a weirdo that spends all my fucking time
It's all
on that rabbit hole.
I think until it happens to you, you don't
know how
you don't know how you'd react. And I think that the closure thing is that is such a devastating blow that having that closure moment is going to be the most important thing, I would imagine. And I think that the reality of this is, because as I'm saying that, like, you know, even if for Lucy Letby this is resolved in reasonable time, the ripple effects of this is going to be this will be decades and decades. So this is not like and we won. Life and fortune doesn't work in that way. That's a very Hollywood narrative kind of finish, and I think that what we're looking at here is something that will be this is going to be ongoing. To me, that this story doesn't end until the justice system is looked at, the NHS is looked at, and constructively helped. I think that is the only positive legacy that come out of it. So I think what her defining legacy could be, referring to Lucy Letby, is you've gone through the worst thing probably that anyone could suffer, but on the other side of that, this incident or fact, this moment in time will lead to possibly incredibly positive constructive change if enough of us want to see that happen.
My worry is that it's the opposite, that she's left rotting in jail for 10 years, and meanwhile the Thirlwell inquiry announces that everybody needs to be fucking psychic and spot imaginary murderers, and that you have a huge, because this is already happening to a certain extent, people don't go into nursing, people don't want to take those jobs, or if they are in those jobs, they're all, nurses are already saying, we're not sending cards to the parents, we're not communicating with them. So nurses are having to cut off a great big fucking chunk of the empathy that makes them good at their jobs for fear that it be misinterpreted. That's my fear.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty well-founded fear. But again, if people are loud enough, something will happen.
Yeah.
And that's all that is. Once as you say, we talk about this all the time, once they make a media movie out of it or something like that, maybe Keir Starmer might finally pay attention to it, because that seems to be how you get the man's attention these days, is to do a drama series. But if enough people make enough noise and it becomes the consensus, if the normal view of the public is there's an innocent person in jail, that's the beginning of
and it does lead to
something
trouble. I
wrong.
mean, I don't think there are many people who still think the Guildford Four are guilty.
Yeah, and but the stepping stone process has to be, let's say, out of jail, but then there's the real work of, like, well, the justice system having to be looked at, because, well, what the fuck's happened here, and obviously the state of care with the NHS have to be babies alone.
Again, we've discussed it before, but something like 3/4 of maternal units in the UK are dangerous. Not good enough, dangerous. Yeah. That's a fucking disgrace.